Before we participate with Caesar to his battles in Britain, subscribe to the channel. Let us begin. Caesar, though unaware of their plans, suspected what would happen from the situation with his ships and the fact that they had stopped giving hostages. Therefore, he prepared for all contingencies. He brought in grain daily from the fields into the camp and used the materials and bronze from the most severely damaged ships to repair the others. He ordered supplies useful for these repairs to be brought from the mainland. With great effort from the soldiers, he managed to make the remaining ships seaworthy after losing 12. While these things were happening, one legion, the 7th, was sent out to forage as usual, and no suspicion of war had arisen at that time. Some of the men stayed in the fields, and some were going back and forth to the camp. Those who were on guard at the camp's gates reported to Caesar that more dust than usual was seen in the area where the legion had marched. Suspecting that something new had been initiated by the barbarians, Caesar ordered the cohorts on guard to follow him to that area, replaced them with 2 other cohorts for the guard duty, and instructed the remaining troops to arm themselves and immediately follow him. After proceeding a little further from the camp, he noticed his men were being pressed by the enemy and struggling to hold their position, while volleys of javelins were being thrown at them from all sides, because the legion was tightly packed together. Since all the grain had been harvested from the remaining parts, the enemy suspected that our men would come to this one remaining section. They had hidden in the woods during the night and then suddenly attacked our men, who were scattered and unarmed while harvesting. A few were killed, and the rest were thrown into confusion as they were surrounded by cavalry and charioteers. This is the type of combat fought from chariots. First, they ride around in all directions, hurling spears and generally disturbing the ranks with the terror caused by the horses and the noise of the wheels. When they have insinuated themselves among the cavalry troops, they leap down from their chariots and fight on foot. Meanwhile, the charioteers withdraw a short distance from the battle and position the chariots so that, if their comrades are pressed by the enemy, they have an easy retreat to their own lines. In this way, they display the mobility of cavalry and the stability of infantry in battle. They become so practiced by daily use and training that they can control their galloping horses even on steep and precipitous ground, quickly turning them and running along the chariot pole, standing on the yoke, and quickly retreating into their chariots. Our men, disturbed by these circumstances and the novelty of the fighting, received timely assistance from Caesar. His arrival made the enemy halt, and our men recovered from their fear. Realizing that the time was not suitable for provoking the enemy or engaging in battle, Caesar held his position, and after a short interval, withdrew the legions back to camp. While these events were taking place, the rest of our men, who were in the fields, returned to camp. Continuous storms for several days kept both our men confined to the camp and the enemy from attacking. Meanwhile, the barbarians sent messengers everywhere, proclaiming the small number of Roman soldiers and highlighting the great opportunity for plunder and permanent liberation if they could expel the Romans from their camp. These messages quickly gathered a large force of infantry and cavalry, which came to the camp. Caesar, though anticipating the same outcome as on previous days, that the enemy would flee if defeated due to their swiftness, still assembled about 30 cavalry that Commius the Atrebatian, as mentioned before, had brought with him, and drew up the legions in battle formation before the camp. Once the battle was joined, the enemy could not withstand the charge of our soldiers for long and turned to flee. Our men pursued them as far as their strength and speed allowed, killing many, then burned all the buildings far and wide before returning to camp. That same day, envoys from the enemy came to Caesar to negotiate peace. Caesar doubled the number of hostages he had previously demanded and ordered them to be brought to the continent, because he did not think it wise to risk a sea voyage with weakened ships so close to the equinox. Seizing a suitable weather opportunity, Caesar set sail shortly after midnight, and all the ships reached the continent safely. However, 2 transport ships could not reach the same port as the others and were driven a little further away. When about 300 soldiers disembarked from these ships and were heading to the camp, the Morini, whom Caesar had left in peace when he departed for Britain, were enticed by the prospect of plunder and surrounded the soldiers with a relatively small force at first, ordering them to lay down their arms if they did not want to be killed. When our men formed a circle and defended themselves, About 6,000 men quickly gathered at the sound of the cornica. Caesar, upon receiving this news, sent all his cavalry from the camp to aid his men. Meanwhile, our soldiers withstood the enemy's assault for over 4 hours, fought very bravely with few wounds, and killed many of the enemy. When our cavalry finally appeared, the enemy threw down their arms and fled, with many of them being killed. The next day, Caesar sent the legate T. Labienus with the legions he had brought back from Britain to subdue the Morini who had rebelled. Due to the drought, they had no refuge in the marshes they had used the previous year, so almost all fell into Labienus' power. Meanwhile, the legates P. Titurius and L. Cotta, who had led the legions into the territories of the Menapii, devastated all their fields, cut down their grain, and burned their buildings. The Menapii had all taken refuge in the densest forests. After completing these tasks, the legates returned to Caesar. Caesar stationed his legions for winter quarters among the Belgae. Only 2 tribes from Britain sent hostages to him. The rest neglected to do so. After these events, a 20-day Thanksgiving was decreed by the Senate based on Caesar's letters. Before seeing what will come next, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you in the next video, Legionary.